The Spirit's Book. Spiritualist Philosophy by Allan Kardec. Translated by Darrell W. Kimball with Marcia M. Scies containing the principles of the Spiritist doctrine concerning the immortality of the soul, the nature of spirits, and their relationships with humankind, moral laws, the present life, the future life, and the destiny of humanity, according to the teachings given by highly evolved spirits through several mediums, received and coordinated the Spirit's Book. Translator's preface to the third edition. This third edition is a further refinement of the second edition, which was a thorough revision of the first. Since the publication of the first edition, we have translated, and the ISC has published the first editions of the other volumes of the Spiritist codification, the Medium's Book, 2006, Heaven and Hell, 2006, The Gospel According to Spiritism, 2008, and Genesis, 2009, as well as the additional work, What is Spiritism? 2010, and they will be revised as new editions are published. In the first two editions, we made a few comments about how we approached a number of grammatical issues, and we will reiterate them here. The authoritative French version was published in 1857, nearly 150 years ago. Apart from the challenge of translating from one language into another and overcoming the structural differences between the two, there were other challenges involving the time period differential. The first and greatest of these challenges was the problem of gender-neutral language. When referring to individuals, we address the problem by using plural pronouns as much as possible because they are gender-neutral, rather than the singular pronoun combinations he or she, him or her, his or her. When referring to a single spirit or soul, the neuter pronoun, it was used since, technically, spirits are sexless, though sometimes the singular. Form was changed to the plural. Nevertheless, we used the personal relative pronouns who and whom when referring to a single spirit or soul. Masculine pronouns were eliminated when referring to God, because Spiritism does not hold to the idea that God should be personified. God is viewed as the first cause, simply through established natural laws, is to replace the pronouns. In other instances, the singular man and all of its related pronouns were usually changed by employing the plural humans, human beings, individuals, etc., which were also used to replace the plural men. Our main goal was to hold as closely to Kardec's original as possible without producing either a transliteration or a paraphrase, which is why we retained as many original terms as possible and adhered to the original style as much as the grammatical and structural differences between the two languages would allow. This edition also includes Anna Blackwell's preface to her version, which has served the English public since the 19th century. Her preface contains a short biography of Allan Kardec, but we have modified it slightly by updating it into modern English. We suggest that the reader who may be unfamiliar with Spiritism as coined and codified by Allan Kardec begin by perusing the table of contents to locate an area of particular interest, a question concerning reincarnation, prayer, the premature death of children, life after death, etc., and see how various high-order spirits, the spirits, address the issue. This will lead to further interest at which time the reader should begin. With Kardec's introduction, essential for setting the whole body of knowledge as revealed by the spirits within the proper context, and from their work through the entire book. Daryl Kimball, Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, 2010. Anna Blackwell's preface to her version. Updated into modern English by the translators Hippolyte Leon Denizard Ryvale, better known by his pen name, Allan Kardec, was born in Lyons on October 4, 1804, into an old family of Bourg-en-Bresse, which for many generations had been honorably distinguished in the magistracy and at the bar. His father, like his grandfather, was an attorney of good standing and high character. His mother, who was remarkably beautiful, accomplished, elegant, and amiable, was the object, on his part, of a profound and worshiping affection that remained unchanged throughout his entire life. Educated at the institution of Pestalozzi in Redon, Canton de Vaud, he acquired at an early age the habit of investigation and the freedom of thought of which his later life was destined to furnish so striking an example. Endowed by nature with a passion for teaching, he devoted himself from the age of 14 to aiding the studies of those of his schoolfellows who were less advanced than himself. He was so fond of botany that he would often spend an entire day in the mountains, walking 20 or 30 miles with a backpack in search of specimens for his herbarium. Born in a Catholic country, but educated in a Protestant one, as a mere boy he began to meditate on the means of bringing about a unity of belief among the various Christian sects, a project of religious reform at which he labored in silence for many years, but necessarily without success, since the elements of the desired solution were not in his possession at the time. Having finished his studies at Verdun, he returned to Lyons at age 24 with the intention of devoting himself to law. However, various acts of religious intolerance, to which he unexpectedly found himself subjected, led him to renounce the idea of preparing for the bar and to take up residence in Paris, where he occupied himself for some time in translating Telemachus and other standard French books for youth into German. Having finally determined what his career would be, in 1828 he purchased a large and flourishing educational establishment for boys and devoted himself to the work of teaching, for which, by his tastes and acquirements, he was peculiarly suited. In 1830, and at his own expense, he rented a large hall on Rue de Sèvres, where he offered courses consisting of free lectures on chemistry, physics, comparative anatomy, and astronomy. He continued these lectures over a period of 10 years. They were highly successful and were attended by an audience of over 500 persons of every social class, many of whom have since attained eminence in the scientific world. Always desirous to make education attractive as well as profitable, he invented an ingenious method of computation and constructed a mnemotechnic table of French history for enabling students to remember the remarkable events and discoveries of each reign. Some of the numerous educational works he published were A Plan for the Improvement of Public Instruction, which he submitted in 1828 to the French Legislative Chamber, which praised it highly, but took no action with regards to it. A course of practical and theoretic arithmetic on the Pestalozzian system for the use of teachers and mothers, 1829. A classical grammar of the French tongue, 1831. a manual for the use of candidates for examination in the public schools with explanatory solutions of various problems of arithmetic and geometry, 1848. Normal dictations for the examinations of the Hôtel de Ville and the Sorbonne with special dictations on orthographic difficulties, 1849. These works were highly regarded at the time of their publication and are still in use in many French schools. Their author continued to produce new editions of some of them at the time of his death. He was a member of several scholarly societies, such as the Royal Society of Arras, which awarded him with the Prize of Honor in 1831 for a remarkable essay on the question, "What is the system of study most in harmony with the needs of the epoch?" For several years, he was secretary to the Phrenological Society of Paris and took an active part in the labors of the Society of Magnetism, giving much time to the practical investigation of somnambulism, trance, clairvoyance, and the various other phenomena connected with mesmerism. The following brief outline of his labors will suffice to show his mental activity, the variety of his knowledge, the eminently practical turn of his mind, and his constant endeavor to be useful to his fellow humans. Around 1850, when the phenomenon of table turning was grabbing the attention of Europe and ushering in the other phenomena since known as Spiritist, he quickly divined the real nature of those phenomena as being evidence for the existence of an order of relationships that had until then been suspected rather than known, i.e., those that unite the visible and invisible worlds. Foreseeing the vast importance to both science and religion of such an extension of the field of human observation, he immediately began a careful investigation of the new phenomena. A friend of his had two daughters who had become what are now called mediums. They were carefree, lively, amiable girls who were fond of socializing, dancing, and amusement. When sitting by themselves or with their young companions, they habitually received communications in harmony with their worldly and somewhat frivolous dispositions. However, to the surprise of all concerned, it was discovered that whenever Kardec was present, the messages transmitted through these young ladies acquired a very grave and serious character. When he asked the invisible intelligences what caused this change, he was told that spirits of a much higher order than those who habitually communicate through the two young mediums have come expressly for you and will continue to do so in order to enable you to fulfill an important religious mission. Much astonished at such an unexpected announcement, he immediately proceeded to test its truthfulness by drawing up a series of progressive questions in relation to the various problems of human life and the universe in which we find ourselves, and submitted them to his unseen interlocutors. He received their answers to these questions through the instrumentality of the two young mediums, who willingly consented to devote a couple of evenings every week to this purpose, and who thus obtained, through table rapping and planchette writing, the replies that have become the basis of the Spiritist theory, and which they were as little capable of appreciating as of inventing. When these conversations had been going on for nearly 2 years, he remarked to his wife one day, in reference to the unfolding of these views, which he had followed with intelligent sympathy, "It is a most curious thing. My conversations with the invisible intelligences have completely revolutionized my ideas and convictions. The instructions thus transmitted constitute an entirely new theory of human life, duty, and destiny, which appears to me to be perfectly rational and coherent admirably lucid and consoling and intensely interesting. I have a great mind to publish these conversations in a book, for it seems to me that what interests me so deeply might very likely prove interesting to others as well. His wife warmly approved of the idea, and so he then submitted it to his unseen interlocutors, who replied in the usual way that it was they who had suggested it to his mind, that their communications had been made to him, not for himself alone, but for the express purpose of being given to the world as he proposed to do, and that the time had now come for putting this plan into action. To the book in which you will embody our instructions, continued the communicating intelligences, you will give, as being our work rather than yours, the title Le Livre des Esprits, the Spirit's Book. You shall not publish it under your own name, but under the pseudonym Allan Kardec. 1. Keep your own name Rival for your own books already published, but take and keep the name we have now given you for the book you are about to publish under our orders, and in general, for all the work that you will have to do to fulfill the mission, which, as we have already told you, has been confided to you by Providence, and which will gradually open before you as you proceed in it under our guidance. The book thus produced and published sold very quickly, winning converts not only in France, but all over the continent, and making the name of Allan Kardec a household word to the readers who knew him only in connection with it. From that time onwards, he was called only by that name, except by his old personal friends, with whom both he and his wife always retained their family name. Soon after its publication, he founded the Parisian Society of Psychological Studies, of which he was president until his death, and which met every Friday evening at his house for the purpose of obtaining from spirits, through writing mediums, instructions in the elucidation of truth and duty. One an old Breton name in his mother's family. Until his death, he also founded and edited a monthly magazine entitled La Revue Spirite, which was devoted to advocating the views set forth in the Spirit's book. Similar associations were quickly formed all over the world. Many published periodicals of varying degrees of importance in support of the new doctrine, and all of them transmitted to the Parisian Society the most remarkable of the Spirit communications they received. An enormous mass of Spirit teaching, unique both in quantity and in the variety of the sources from which it was obtained, thus found its way into the hands of Kardec, who studied, collated, and coordinated it with unwearied zeal and devotion over a period of 15 years. From the materials thus furnished to him from every quarter of the globe, he enlarged and completed the Spirit's book under the direction of the Spirits, by whom it was originally dictated. The revised edition of the book, which he published in 1857, see preface to the revised edition, has become the recognized textbook of the school of spiritualist philosophy, so intimately associated with his name. From the same materials, he subsequently compiled 4 other works: the Medium's Book, a practical treatise on mediumship and evocations, 1861, The Gospel According to Spiritism, an exposition of morality from the Spiritist point of view, 1864, Heaven and Hell, a vindication of the justice of the divine government of the human race, 1865, and Genesis, showing the concordance of the Spiritist theory with the discoveries of modern science and with the general tenor of the Mosaic. Record as explained by the Spirits, 1868. He also published 2 short treatises entitled What is Spiritism? and Spiritism reduced to its simplest expression. It is to be remarked, in connection with the works just mentioned, that Kardec was not himself a medium, and was therefore obliged to avail himself of the mediumship of others in obtaining the spirit. Communications from which they were evolved. The theory of life and duty, so immediately connected with his name and labors, that it is often erroneously supposed to have been the product of his single mind or of the spirits in immediate connection with him, is therefore far less the expression of a personal or individual opinion than are any of the other spiritualistic theories propounded thus far. This is because the basis of the religious philosophy laid down in his works was not in any way the product of his own intelligence, but was as new to him as to any of his readers. It was progressively adduced by him from the concurrent statements of a legion of spirits through many thousands of mediums who were unknown to each other and belonged to different countries and to every variety of social position. In person, Kardec was somewhat under middle height and strongly built, with a large, round, massive head, well-marked features, and clear gray eyes. He looked more German than French. Energetic and persevering, but of a temperament that was calm, cautious, and unimaginative almost to coldness. Incredulous by nature and by education, a close, logical reasoner and eminently practical in thought and deed, he was equally free from mysticism and enthusiasm. Devoid of ambition, indifferent to luxury and display, the modest income he had acquired from teaching and from the sale of his educational works sufficed for the simple style of living he had adopted, and allowed him to devote all the profits arising from the sale of his Spiritist books and from the Revue Spirite to propagating the movement he initiated. His excellent wife relieved him of all domestic and worldly cares, and thus enabled him to consecrate himself entirely to the work to which he believed himself to have been called, and which he pursued with unswerving devotion to the exclusion of all extraneous occupations, interests, and companionships from the time he first began it until he died. He made no visits beyond a small circle of intimate friends and very rarely left Paris. Spending his winters in the heart of the town in the rooms where he published his review, and his summers at the Villa Segur, a little semi-rural retreat which he had built and planted to be his home in his wife's old age, and which was located in the suburban region behind the Champ de Mars. The area is now crossed in every direction by broad avenues and is quickly being built over, but at that time it was a sort of waste land that might still pass for the country. Grave, slow of speech, unassuming in manner, yet not without a certain quiet dignity resulting from the earnestness and single-mindedness which were the distinguishing traits of his character, neither courting nor avoiding discussion, but never volunteering any remark upon the subject to which he had devoted his life, he gracefully received the innumerable visitors from every part of the world who came to converse with him in regard to the views of which he was the recognized exponent. He answered questions and objections, explained difficulties, and provided information to all serious inquirers with whom he talked with freedom and animation, his face occasionally lighting up with a genial and pleasant smile, though his habitual sobriety of demeanor was such that he was never known to laugh. Among the thousands by whom he was thus visited were many of high rank in the social, literary, artistic, and scientific worlds. The Emperor Napoleon III, whose interest in spirit phenomena was no mystery, sent for him several times and held long conversations with him at the Tuileries concerning the doctrines of the Spirit's book. Having suffered for many years from heart disease, Kardec drew up the plans in 1869 for a new Spiritist organization that would carry on the work of spreading the doctrine after his death. In order to assure its existence, he gave it a legal and commercial status and was determined to make it a regularly comprised joint stock limited liability publishing and bookselling company to be constituted for a period of 99 years with power to buy and sell, to issue stock, to receive donations and bequests, etc. To this society, which was to be called the Joint Stock Company for the continuation of the works of Allan Kardec, he intended to transfer the copyright of his Spiritist writings and of the Revue Spirite. Allan Kardec, however, was not destined to witness the realization of the project in which he took so deep an interest, and which has since been carried out with entire exactitude by his widow. On March 31st, 1869, having just finished drawing up the Constitution and rules of the society from which he foresaw that he would soon be removed, he was seated in his usual chair at his desk in his rooms on Rue Saint-Anne and was tying up a bundle of papers when his busy life was suddenly brought to an end by the rupture of an aneurysm from which he had so long suffered. His passage from the earth to the spirit world, with which he had so closely identified himself, was instantaneous, painless, and without a sigh or a tremor, a most peaceful falling asleep and reawakening, a fit ending for such a life. His remains were interred in the cemetery of Montmartre in presence of a great concourse of friends, many hundreds of whom assembled there every year on the anniversary of his decease, during which a few commemorative words are spoken in fresh flowers and wreaths, as is usual in continental graveyards, are laid upon his tomb. It is impossible to precisely ascertain the number of those who have adopted the views set forth by Allan Kardec. They are estimated by themselves to be many millions, but they are at the least incontestably very numerous. The periodicals devoted to the advocacy of these views in various countries already number over 40, and new ones are constantly appearing. Kardec's death has not slackened the acceptance of the views set forth by him, and which are believed by those who hold them to be the basis, but the basis only, of the new development of religious truth predicted by Christ, the beginning of the promised revelation of many things that have been kept hidden since the foundation of the world, and for the knowledge of which the human race was not ready at the time of that prediction. Anna Blackwell, Paris, 1876. Preface to the revised edition and the first edition of this work, we announced that there would be a supplementary part comprised of all the issues which could not be fitted into that edition, or which later circumstances and investigation subsequently might bring to light. However, since those issues pertain to materials that had already been discussed and from which they had developed, to publish them in a separate volume would not actually represent a sequel. Therefore, we preferred to wait for the reprinting of the original in order to assemble all the parts together, and we also took advantage of the opportunity to arrange the book's contents more methodically, while at the same time eliminating duplications. As a result, this reprinting may be considered as an although the principles of the first edition have undergone no change, except for a few instances that comprise complements and explanations rather than true modifications. In spite of the diversity of the sources from which they have emanated, such conformity to the received teachings is an important fact for establishing the Spiritist science. Moreover, our correspondence has shown us that communications that are identical, if not in form, at least in substance, were obtained in different places and occurred even before the publication of our book, a fact that has come to confirm and systematize them. History, in turn, shows that most of its principles have been professed by them. Most distinguished thinkers of ancient and modern times, this fact lends them additional sanction. The teachings regarding mediums and spirit manifestations make up an aspect of Spiritism that is somewhat different from the philosophy per se and can be the object of special study. Since that aspect has received considerable improvement after more experience has been acquired, we have decided to make a separate volume of it, containing the responses to all the questions related to manifestations and mediums, as well as to make several observations on practical Spiritism. This work will be a continuation of or supplement to the Spirit's book. Allan Kardec. Introduction. When new matters arise, new words are needed for the sake of clarity of language in order to avoid the confusion inherent in multiple meanings for the same terms. For example, the words spiritual, spiritualist, and spiritualism each have a well-defined meaning. To give each of them a new meaning in order to apply it to the Spirit's doctrine would be to multiply the already numerous causes of ambiguity. Strictly speaking, spiritualism is the opposite of materialism, and everyone who believes there is something within them that is more than matter are spiritualists. However, it does not necessarily follow that they must therefore believe in the existence of spirits or in communications with the invisible world. Therefore, instead of the words spiritual and spiritualism for designating this latter belief, we have coined and employed the words Spiritist and Spiritism. These two terms, reflect their origin and their fundamental meaning, and they thus have the advantage of being perfectly understandable. We will leave spiritualism to its own meaning. Hence, we will say that the principle of the Spiritist doctrine, or Spiritism, is based on the relationship between the material world and the invisible world, the latter being inhabited by beings known as spirits. The adherents of Spiritism will be called Spiritists. In a specialized sense, the Spirit's book contains the Spiritist doctrine. In a generalized sense, it is linked to spiritualism and represents one aspect of it. That is why we have inscribed the words on the title page, Spiritualist Philosophy. 2. There is another word that we must also agree on, since it is one of the keys to every moral doctrine, and to that end it has provoked innumerable controversies due to the lack of a generally accepted meaning. It is the word soul. The differences of viewpoints regarding the nature of the soul come from the individual definition that each person attaches to this word. A perfect language in which each idea would be represented by its own specialized term would avoid many arguments. With a single word for each thing, everything would be understood. According to some, the soul is the principle of material organic life. It has no existence of its own, and at death it ceases to exist. This view is purely materialistic. In this sense and by comparison, those who have adopted this view speak of the body at death as though it were a broken instrument that no longer produces any sound, i.e., that it no longer has a soul. According to this viewpoint, the soul would be an effect rather than a cause. Others believe that the soul is the principle of intelligence, the universal agent of which each being absorbs a portion. According to this group, there is only one soul in the entire universe. This soul distributes a spark of itself to the various intelligent beings throughout their lives. At death, each spark returns to the common source, where it merges once again into the whole, just as streams and rivers return to the ocean that gave them origin. This viewpoint differs from the preceding one in that, according to this theory, there is something more than matter within us, something that remains after death. On the other hand, it is almost as if nothing actually remained. Since our individual personality no longer survives, we are no longer conscious of ourselves. According to this viewpoint, the universal soul would be God, and each being would be a portion of God. It is a type of pantheism. Finally, according to others, the soul is a moral being distinct from and independent of matter, and it preserves its individuality after death. This conception is incontestably the most common because, under one name or another, the idea of this being that survives the body is an instinctive belief that is independent of any particular teaching and can be found among all cultures to whatever degree they may have become civilized. This doctrine, in which the soul is a cause and not an effect, is that of spiritualists. Without discussing the merit of each of these viewpoints and considering only the linguistic side of the issue, we will state that these three applications of the word soul comprise three distinct ideas, each one requiring a different term. Thus, the word soul can have one of three meanings, and each is correct from its own point of view according to its own particular definition. Language itself is to blame for having only one word available for three different ideas. In order to avoid confusion, it would be necessary to limit the meaning of the word soul to only one of those three ideas. Choosing this or the definition would not matter, since it is simply a matter of convention. The important thing is clarity. We think that it is most logical to take it in its commonest meaning, and we thus use soul to indicate the immaterial and individual being that dwells within and survives the body. Even if this being did not really exist, and was no more than a product of the imagination, a term would be needed to designate it nonetheless. Lacking such a specific term for each of the other two ideas, we will apply the label vital principle to define the material and organic life principle, whatever its source may be, which is common to all living creatures, from plants to humans. Since life can exist without the faculty of thought, the vital principle is something distinct and independent of it. The word vitality would not express the same idea, however. For some, the vital principle is a property of matter, an effect produced wherever matter is found under given conditions. According to others, and this idea is the commonest, it is found in a special, universally diffused fluid point to each being absorbs and assimilates a portion of this fluid throughout its life, much as inert bodies absorb light. This substance is the vital fluid, which, according to certain opinions, would be the same thing as the animalized electric energy, also designated as magnetic fluid, neural fluid, etc. Whatever the case may be, there is one incontestable fact, for it results from observation, and that is that organic beings possess an inner force that produces the phenomenon of life as long as this force exists, that physical life is common to all organic beings and is independent of intelligence and thought, that intelligence and thought are faculties peculiar to certain organic species, and lastly, that among the organic species endowed with intelligence and thought, there is one that is endowed with a special moral sense that gives it incontestable ascendancy over the others, the human species. It should be understood that in its multiple meanings, the term soul does not exclude either materialism or pantheism. Spiritualists themselves can very well understand soul according to one or the other of the first two definitions, without denying the distinct immaterial being. They would give some other name to it. Thus, the word soul does not represent a personal opinion. It is a Proteus 3 that everyone may adapt in their own way, a fact that has led to endless argument. To see the footnote in question 27 for an explanation of this term, tr. 3. A Greek see God capable of assuming different forms, tr. Even if we were to use the word soul in all three of its meanings, we might avoid confusion if we added a qualification to it in order to specify the way in which we envisage it or the application we are giving it at the time. Hence, it would be a generic term representing simultaneously the principles of material life, intelligence, and moral sense. Each of these would be distinguished by a particular attribute, like gas, for example, which may be differentiated by using the words hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Perhaps we could most correctly use the term vital soul for the principle of material life, intellectual soul for the principle of intelligence, and spiritual soul for the principle of our individuality after death. As one can plainly see, it is all a matter of words, but a very important matter for us to understand nevertheless. Thus, the vital soul would be common to all organic beings, plants, animals, and humans. The intellectual soul would be the distinctive property of animals and humans, and the spiritual soul would apply only to humans. We believe it is necessary to insist on such explanations, since the Spiritist doctrine naturally rests on the existence within us of a being independent of matter. This being survives the body at death. Since the word soul is repeated frequently throughout this work, we have thus had to set the meaning we attach to it in order to avoid any misunderstanding. We now come to the principal objective of this preliminary instruction. 3. Like every new theory, the Spiritist doctrine has its followers and its detractors. We will endeavor to respond to some of the latter's objections by examining the validity of the reasons upon which such objections are based, without, however, intending to convince everybody. There are those who believe that the light was made solely for them. We will turn our attention to those of good faith, who are without preconceptions or set minds, but who sincerely desire to learn. We will prove to them that most of their objections to the doctrine are the result of an incomplete observation of the factual events and a judgment formed too quickly and too rashly. To start with, we will briefly recall the progressive series of phenomena that originated the doctrine. The first event to be observed was the movement of various objects, popularly called table turning for, or the dance of the tables. This phenomenon appears to have been first observed in America, or rather, it recurred in that country, since history shows that it actually dates back to remote antiquity and was produced and accompanied by other strange occurrences, such as unusual noises and raps emitted without any obvious or known cause. From America, it rapidly spread throughout Europe and other parts of the world. It was met with much disbelief at first, but the multiplicity of the experiences soon left no doubt as to its reality. If the phenomenon had been limited to the movement of physical objects, it might have been explained by some purely physical cause. After all, we are far from knowing about all the secret agents of nature, or even all the properties of those we do know about. Electricity, for example, offers to humankind resources that multiply daily, and it appears ready to illuminate science with a new light. Therefore, if electricity were modified by certain circumstances or some unknown agent, it is quite possible that it could have been the cause behind the movement. The gathering of several persons in a group increased the strength of the action, which appeared to support this theory since. Such a group could be regarded as a kind of multi-cell battery whose power corresponded to the number of participants, or sometimes known as table tipping, TR. The circular movement of the objects was nothing extraordinary. It belongs to nature itself. All the heavenly bodies move in circles. Thus, we could have had before us nothing more than a small reflection of the general movement of the universe, or rather, under certain circumstances, and as yet unknown cause fortuitously producing in small objects a current analogous to that which impels the worlds through space. The movement, however, was not always circular. It was frequently brusque and disorderly. The object would be violently shaken, overturned, carried about in every direction, and contrary to all the laws of statics 5, suspended and held in the air. Nevertheless, there was nothing in these events that might not be explainable by the force of some invisible physical agent. After all, do we not see electricity knock down buildings, uproot trees, attract or repel them? Heaviest bodies or hurl them to considerable distances, assuming that the unusual noises and raps were not the common effects of the wood expanding or some other fortuitous cause, then they might very well have been produced by an accumulation of some kind of concealed fluid. After all, does not electricity produce the most violent noises? Up to this point, everything might have been considered as belonging to the domain of the purely physical and physiological. Even within this narrow scope, however, one would think that the material at hand would surely be worthy of serious study and the attention of scholars. Why was that not the case? As hard as it is to admit, it is connected to reasons that prove, among 1,000 other similar ones, the shallowness of the human mind. First, the commonness of the main object that served as the basis for the earliest experiments, a plain table, was nothing out of the ordinary. How interesting is the influence of a simple word in phi, the branch of mechanics that deals with bodies at rest or forces in equilibrium. Random House Webster's College Dictionary, 1991, TR. The most serious matters. Without ever considering the fact that the movement could involve any object whatsoever, the focus on tables undoubtedly prevailed as the most convenient because they could accommodate more individuals around them than any other piece of furniture. However, superior minds were sometimes too narrow-minded and felt it too belittling to concern themselves with what was commonly called the dance of the tables. If the phenomenon observed by Galvani 6 had likewise been observed by ordinary persons instead and given some burlesque nickname, it would probably have also been regarded as having the same credibility as a magic wand. What scholars would not have deemed it beneath them to concern themselves with the dance of the frogs? A few individuals, however, were modest enough to admit that nature might not have given them its final word, and they wanted to observe the matter for themselves in order to set their minds at ease. But it just so happened that the phenomenon did not always correspond to their expectations, and since it was not produced consistently either according to their wishes or their method of experimentation, they came to a negative conclusion. However, despite their verdict, the tables continued to turn, and we may state with Galileo, nevertheless, they move. Furthermore, we can state that the occurrences have multiplied in such a way that nowadays 7 they have earned. The right of citizenship, and that we only need to find a rational explanation for them. Can anything be inferred against the reality of the phenomenon by the fact that it is not always produced in exactly the same way and according to the will and requirements of the observer? The phenomena of electricity and chemistry depend on certain conditions. But could we deny Luigi Galvani was an Italian scientist who discovered animal electricity while dissecting a frog? He touched one of the frog's nerves with his scalpel, causing the frog's leg to twitch as though it were still alive. Thus Kardec's reference to the dance of the frogs analogy with the dance of the tables, tr. 7 Kardec wrote this text in the mid-1850s, tr. Their existence because they cannot be produced apart from such conditions? Should we find it surprising that the phenomenon of the movement of objects by the human fluid also requires its own special conditions, and that it ceases when the observers, set in their point of view, try to produce it at their own whim or subject it to the law of ordinary phenomena, without considering the fact that for a new order of events there must also be new laws? In order to understand such laws, it is necessary to study the circumstances under which the phenomena are produced, and such a study cannot be but the result of persevering, careful, and sometimes very prolonged observation. People often object that there is frequently obvious fraud involved. We in turn would like to ask if they are quite sure that it is fraud, or instead, if it might be that they have attached the fraud label to things they were unable to understand, the same way uneducated persons might see an age. Physicists experiments only the tricks of a deft magician, and even assuming that fraud does sometimes occur, would that be a reason to deny the phenomenon itself? Must we deny physics simply because there are magicians who call themselves physicists? Moreover, it is necessary to consider the character of supposedly fraudulent persons and what interest they might have in deceiving us. Could it all be just a prank? A prank can hold our attention for a little while, but if it goes on too long, it becomes as wearisome for the prankster as it is for the object of the prank. Furthermore, a prank perpetrated from one end of the world to the other, and among the most serious, venerable, and enlightened individuals would be something at least as extraordinary as the phenomenon itself. 4. If the phenomena we are considering had been limited only to the movement of objects, they would have remained within the domain of the physical sciences, as we have stated, but that is not what happened. They were destined to place us on the trail of events of a strange order. It was soon discovered, we do not know at whose initiative, that the impulse given to the objects was not simply the product of some blind mechanical force, rather, an intelligent cause was behind in the movement. This opened the way to an entirely new field of observation. The veil could be lifted on many mysteries. Was there actually an intelligent power involved, however? If so, what was it? What was its nature? What was its origin? Was it superior to humankind? Such were the other questions that derived from the first. The first intelligent manifestations occurred by means of tables that moved and struck the floor with one leg a certain number of times, thereby responding to the question asked, according to what had been agreed on as to the number that would indicate either yes or no. Even here there was nothing very convincing for the skeptics, since it could have been seen as a chance effect. Later, however, more highly developed responses were received using the letters of the alphabet. By striking the floor a certain number of times for each letter, the table formed words and sentences in response to the questions. The correctness of the responses and their congruency with the question caused astonishment. When asked about its nature, the mysterious being who gave the responses declared that it was a spirit. It stated its name and furnished other sorts of information. This should be seen as a highly important occurrence. No one individual in particular had ever even thought of spirits as a way to explain the phenomenon. Instead, it was the phenomenon itself that revealed the term. Hypotheses are frequently formed in the physical sciences to serve as a basis for reasoning, but that did not happen in this case. Communicating in this manner, however, was wearisome and inconvenient. One of these invisible beings, and this is also exactly the same way and according to the will and requirements of the observer? The phenomena of electricity and chemistry depend on certain conditions. But could we deny Luigi Galvani was an Italian scientist who discovered animal electricity while dissecting a frog? He touched one of the frog's nerves with his scalpel, causing the frog's leg to twitch as though it were still alive. Thus Kardec's reference to the dance of the frogs analogy with the dance of the tables, tr. 7 Kardec wrote this text in the mid-1850s, tr. Their existence because they cannot be produced apart from such conditions? Should we find it surprising that the phenomenon of the movement of objects by the human fluid also requires its own special conditions, and that it ceases when the observers, set in their point of view, try to produce it at their own whim or subject it to the law of ordinary phenomena, without considering the fact that for a new order of events there must also be new laws? In order to understand such laws, it is necessary to study the circumstances under which the phenomena are produced, and such a study cannot be but the result of persevering, careful, and sometimes very prolonged observation. People often object that there is frequently obvious fraud involved. We in turn would like to ask if they are quite sure that it is fraud, or instead, if it might be that they have attached the fraud label to things they were unable to understand, the same way uneducated persons might CNA. Physicists experiments only the tricks of a deaf magician. And even assuming that fraud does sometimes occur, would that be a reason to deny the phenomenon itself? Must we deny physics simply because there are magicians who call themselves physicists? Moreover, it is necessary to consider the character of supposedly fraudulent persons and what interest they might have in deceiving us. Could it all be just a prank? A prank can hold our attention for a little while, but if it goes on too long, it becomes as wearisome for the prankster as it is for the object of the prank. Furthermore, a prank perpetrated from one end of the world to the other, and among the most serious, venerable, and enlightened individuals would be something at least as extraordinary as the phenomenon itself. 4. If the phenomena we are considering had been limited only to the movement of objects, they would have remained within the domain of the physical sciences, as we have stated, but that is not what happened. They were destined to place us on the trail of events of a strange order. It was soon discovered, we do not know at whose initiative, that the impulse given to the objects was not simply the product of some blind mechanical force, rather, an intelligent cause was behind in the movement. This opened the way to an entirely new field of observation. The veil could be lifted on many mysteries. Was there actually an intelligent power involved, however? If so, what was it? What was its nature? What was its origin? Was it superior to humankind? Such were the other questions that derived from the first. The first intelligent manifestations occurred by means of tables that moved and struck the floor with one leg a certain number of times, thereby responding to the question asked, according to what had been agreed on as to the number that would indicate either yes or no. Even here there was nothing very convincing for the skeptics, since it could have been seen as a chance effect. Later, however, more highly developed responses were received using the letters of the alphabet. By striking the floor a certain number of times for each letter, The table formed words and sentences in response to the questions. The correctness of the responses and their congruency with the question caused astonishment. When asked about its nature, the mysterious being who gave the responses declared that it was a spirit. It stated its name and furnished other sorts of information. This should be seen as a highly important occurrence. No one individual in particular had ever even thought of spirits as a way to explain the phenomenon. Instead, it was the phenomenon itself that revealed the term. Hypotheses are frequently formed in the physical sciences to serve as a basis for reasoning, but that did not happen in this case. Communicating in this manner, however, was wearisome and inconvenient. One of these invisible beings, and this is also a noteworthy occurrence, suggested another. This particular spirit advised fitting a pencil to a small basket or other object. When placed on a sheet of paper, the basket was moved by the same hidden power that had turned the tables. However, instead of a simple regular movement, the pencil wrote by itself, forming words, sentences, and entire discourses of many pages dealing with the deepest questions of philosophy, morality, metaphysics, psychology, etc., and as quickly as though written by hand. This suggestion was given in America, France, and several other countries simultaneously. Here are the terms in which it was given in Paris on June 10, 1853, to one of the most fervent disciples of the doctrine, who for many years, since 1849, had been occupied with the evocation of spirits. Go into the next room and get that little basket, attach a pencil to it, and then place it on a sheet of paper with your fingers on the rim. This was done, and after a few moments, the basket began to move, and the pencil legibly wrote this sentence: I expressly forbid you to tell anyone what I have just told you. The next time I write, I will write better. Since the object to which the pencil is fitted is merely an instrument, its nature and form do not matter. The most convenient means was sought for, and it was thus that many individuals began to use a planchette. The basket or planchette will not move, however, except under the influence of certain persons gifted with a special ability. These are called mediums, that is, intermediaries between spirits and humans. The conditions that produce this ability are linked both to physical and moral causes that are still imperfectly understood. Mediums are of all ages, of both sexes, and of all degrees of intellectual development. Moreover, the faculty can be developed further by exercising it. A small triangular or heart-shaped board, supported by two casters and a pencil or stylus that, when moved by the fingertips across a surface, supposedly writes clairvoyant messages or subconscious thoughts. Webster's OPCIT-TR. It was then realized that the basket and the planchette were only extensions of the hand, and that when mediums held the pencil directly, their hand was made to write by an involuntary, almost feverish impulse. In this way, the communications became faster, easier, and complete. Nowadays, this is the most common method, and the number of persons endowed with this ability is quite considerable and increases daily. Finally, experience revealed many other varieties of mediumship, and it was discovered that communications could also occur through speech, hearing, sight, touch, etc., and even through spirits writing directly, that is, without using the medium's hand or the pencil. This fact having been established, there was still one more essential point to consider: the role of the medium in the responses, and the part he or she might play both mechanically and mentally. 2. Crucial circumstances, which would not escape the attentive observer, make it possible to settle the issue. The first is the way by which the basket moves under the medium's influence by simply placing the fingers on its rim. An examination will show the impossibility of the medium guiding the basket in any way. This impossibility becomes especially obvious when 2 or 3 persons are touching the basket at the same time. It would require a truly phenomenal coordination of movement between them, in addition to an extraordinary similarity of thought that would enable them to understand each other and give answers to the questions. Another no less original fact adds to the problem, that being the radical change in the writing according to the individual spirit who communicates, the same writing recurs whenever the same spirit returns. For this to happen, it would be necessary for the medium to have trained him or herself to change writing styles 20 different ways, and furthermore, he or she would have to remember the style of this or that spirit every time. The second circumstance results from the nature of the responses themselves, which, in most cases, especially when dealing with abstract or scientific questions, are obviously outside the knowledge, and sometimes the intellectual reach, of the medium. Moreover, the medium is usually unaware of what is being written or may not even understand the question, which may be asked mentally or even in a foreign language, with the answer given in the same language. Furthermore, the basket may write spontaneously about some completely unexpected subject, without any question having been asked regarding it. In some cases, the responses reveal a level of wisdom, depth, and timeliness, and the thoughts are so elevated and sublime that they could only have come from a higher intelligence imbued with the purest morality. At other times, they are so flippant, so frivolous, and so banal that reason refuses to accept the possibility that they could have come from the same source. Such diversity of language can only be explained by the diversity of the intelligences who manifest themselves. Are these intelligences human or not? That is the point to clarify, and for which a complete explanation, as conveyed by the spirits 9 themselves, will be found in this book. Here we are facing obvious effects that are produced outside the circle of our habitual observations. These effects do not occur mysteriously, but in the full light of day. Anyone can see and observe them because they are not the privilege of one individual in particular, but are repeated every day by thousands of persons at will. These effects necessarily have a cause, and since they reveal the action of an intelligence and a will, they are outside the purely physical realm. Many theories have been formulated regarding the matter. We will examine them briefly, and will see if they can render 9 when the term the spirits with a capital S appears in the text. It is referring to the group of highly evolved spirits who were involved in revealing the Spiritist doctrine, and after whom this work has been entitled. See the prolegomena, tr. Comprehensible all the facts that have surfaced. In the meantime, however, let us accept the existence of beings distinct from humankind, since that is the explanation given by the intelligences themselves, and let us see what they might have to tell us. 6. As we stated previously, the beings who communicate have identified themselves as spirits, and at least some of them say that they have lived before as human beings on the earth. They comprise the spirit world, as during our life on earth we comprise the corporeal world. We will now briefly sum up the main points of the doctrine that they have transmitted to us so that we may more easily reply to certain objections. God is eternal, immutable, immaterial, one, all-powerful, and supremely just and good. God created the universe, which includes all animate and inanimate, material and immaterial beings. The material beings comprise the visible or corporeal world, whereas the immaterial beings comprise the invisible or spirit world, i.e., the world of spirits. The spirit world is the normal, primitive, eternal, pre-existent, and all-surviving world. The corporeal world is secondary. It could cease to exist, or it might never have existed in the first place, without changing the essence of the spirit world. Spirits temporarily take on a perishable material envelope, and its destruction by death returns them to freedom. From among all the different species of corporeal beings, God chose the human species for the incarnation of spirits who have reached a certain degree of development. This endows them with a moral and intellectual ascension over the others. The soul is an incarnate spirit. The body is only its envelope. Human beings are composed of three things. First, the body or material being, similar to that of the animals, animated by the same vital principle. Second, the soul or immaterial being, the spirit incarnated in the body. And third, the link that unites the soul to the body, an intermediary principle between the body and spirit. Human beings thus have two natures. By means of their body, they share in the nature of the animals and share the same instincts. By means of their soul, they share in the nature of the spirits. The link or peri-spirit unites the body and the spirit. It is a sort of semi-material envelope. Death destroys only the denser envelope, i.e., the physical body. The spirit retains the peri-spirit, which comprises its ethereal body. The peri-spirit is invisible to us in its normal state, but the spirit can render it visible and even tangible, as occurs during the phenomenon of apparitions. Therefore, a spirit is not an abstract, indefinable being that can only be conceived of by thought. It is a real, circumscribed being that in certain cases may be perceived by our senses of sight, hearing, and touch. Spirits belong to different orders, and they are not all equal in power, intelligence, knowledge, or morality. Those of the first order are the most highly evolved spirits. These spirits are distinguished by their perfection, knowledge, and closeness to God, in addition to the purity of their sentiments and their love of the good 10. They are angels or pure spirits. The other orders are in various degrees more distant from such perfection. The spirits of the lowest orders share our base passions, hatred, envy, jealousy, pride, etc., and actually take pleasure in wrongdoing. Among these are spirits who are neither very good nor very evil, and who are usually more troublesome and scheming than downright wicked. Essentially mischievous and inconsequential, they are the foolish and frivolous spirits. 10. The good, moral righteousness, virtue, Webster's OPCIT, TR. Spirits do not belong to the same order forever. They all improve themselves, passing through the different degrees of the spirit hierarchy. Point 11. This improvement occurs through incarnation, which is imposed on some as an expiation and on others as a mission. Earthly life is a trial to which they submit themselves many times until they reach perfection. It is a kind of sifter or purifier from which they emerge at different degrees of refinement or improvement. Upon leaving the body, the soul returns to the spirit world from which it came. Following a longer or shorter stay in the spirit world, it will once more start a new physical life. Point 12. Since our spirit must pass through many incarnations, it follows that we all have had many existences, and that we will have still others along the course of the different stages of advancement. This will occur either on the earth or on other worlds. The incarnation of spirits always occurs in the human species. It would be an error to believe that the soul or spirit could incarnate in the body of an animal. The many corporeal lives of a spirit are always progressive and never regressive, but the speed of its progress depends on the efforts that it makes to reach perfection. The qualities of the soul are those of the incarnate spirit. Thus, a moral person is the incarnation of a good spirit, while a wicked person is that of a little evolved spirit. The soul has its own particular individuality before incarnating, and it retains it after it separates from the body. Upon its return to the spirit world, the soul re-encounters all those whom it had known while on earth, and all of its former lives are delineated in its memory. It can thus recall all the good and evil it had done. 11C.2 Chap. I NOS 100 FF TR 12. Between this particular doctrine of reincarnation and that of metempsychosis, as held by certain sects, there is a characteristic difference that will be explained in the course of this work. The incarnate spirit is under the influence of matter. Persons who overcome this influence by elevating and purifying their soul grow closer to the good spirits, among whom they will be counted someday. However, those who allow themselves to be controlled by their evil passions and who take full pleasure in satisfying their crude appetites by yielding to their animal nature grow closer to the lower order spirits. Incarnate spirits inhabit various globes throughout the universe. Discarnate or errant spirits do not occupy any fixed or circumscribed region. They are everywhere in space and beside us, watching and intermingling with us all the time. They comprise an invisible population that is always active around us. Spirits constantly act upon the mental world and even upon the physical world. They act upon matter and thought. They comprise one of the powers of nature and are the actual cause behind a multitude of phenomena that have been unexplainable or poorly explained until now, and which have not found a rational solution except in Spiritism. Interaction between spirits and humans is constant. Good spirits encourage us to follow the path of the good. They support us in the trials of life and help us to bear them with courage and resignation. Evil spirits, on the other hand, encourage us to take the path of evil. It is a pleasure for them when they see us succumb and fall to their level. Spirit communications with humans are either concealed or direct. Concealed communications, undetectable in a physical sense, occur through the good or bad influence they exert on us without our even suspecting it, and it depends on our own judgment to distinguish between their good and bad inspirations. Direct communications occur through writing, speech, or other physical means, usually by way of mediums who serve as their instruments. Spirits manifest either by appearing spontaneously or by being evoked. We can evoke all spirits, whether they have animated obscure individuals or the most illustrious personages, regardless of when they lived. We can evoke our relatives, friends, or enemies. Through written or verbal communications, we may obtain advice, information about their current situation, their thoughts about us, whatever revelations they are permitted to convey. Spirits are attracted according to the affinity they have with the moral nature of the persons who evoke them. High-order spirits enjoy serious meetings where the love of the good and a sincere desire to learn and grow predominate. Their presence repels low-order spirits. These find free access to and can influence frivolous persons or those who are only guided by curiosity or wherever else evil instincts may be found. Rather than receiving any good advice or useful information from these spirits, we should expect nothing more from them than frivolities, lies, mischievous pranks, and deceitfulness. They frequently use venerable names in order to better induce us to error. Nevertheless, distinguishing between good and evil 13 spirits is extremely easy. The language of high-order spirits is always dignified, noble, imbued with the highest morality, and free from every lower passion. Their counsels reveal the highest wisdom and always address our progress and the good of humankind. Low-order and inconsequential spirits are almost always trite and can even be crass. They might sometimes say things that are good and true, but more often they make erroneous and absurd statements either out of malice or ignorance. They laugh at people's gullibility and amuse themselves at the cost of those who question them, flattering their vanity and cajoling their desires with false hopes. In sum, serious communications, in the perfect 13C definition of evil in the footnote on p. 100. TR. Meaning of the term only occur at Serious Centers 14, where the members are united by an intimate communion of thought directed toward the good. The morality of high-order spirits may be summed up in the gospel maxim of Christ: do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. That is, practice the good and not evil. In this principle, humankind finds the universal rule of conduct even for the smallest actions. They teach us that selfishness, pride, and lust are passions that drag us down to our animal nature, keeping us enslaved to matter, that those on earth who free themselves of matter through their disregard for worldly frivolities and who cultivate love for their neighbor draw closer to their spiritual nature, that each one of us should make ourselves useful according to the faculties and means that God has placed in our hands to put us to the test, that the strong and powerful should support and protect the weak, for those who abuse their strength and power in order to oppress others violate God's law. Lastly, they teach us that nothing can be hidden in the spirit world, that hypocrites will be unmasked there and all their evil exposed, that the inevitable and constant presence of those whom we have harmed is one of the punishments awaiting us there, that the unevolved and evolved states of spirits in that world correspond to sorrows and joys that are unknown to us on earth. However, they also teach us that there are no unforgivable sins, none that cannot be erased by expiation. Point 15, depending on our desire and effort. we find the necessary means to expiate them in the many existences that enable us to advance on the path of progress toward perfection, our final objective. 14, that is, Spiritist centers. TR 15, this is a very important term in Spiritism. According to Webster's, to expiate means to atone for, make amends or reparation for. Ibid TR. This is the summary of the Spiritist doctrine as it appears in the teachings of the spirits. Let us now look at the objections made against it. 7, for many people, opposition from the institutions of higher learning represents, if not actual evidence, at least a strong argument challenging the doctrine. We are not among those who would clamor against these scholars, lest we be regarded as disrespectful of their erudition. On the contrary, we hold them in great esteem and would be greatly honored to be numbered among them. 16, their opinion, however, does not represent an irrefutable judgment in every circumstance. When science goes beyond the material observation of phenomena and attempts to appraise and explain them, the field opens wide for scientists to make speculations. They build their own little theories, hope to see them prevail, and fiercely defend their veracity. Don't we see every day the most contradictory opinions being proposed, rejected, and repealed as absurd errors, only to be proclaimed later as incontestable truths? The facts are the sole criteria for judgment, the incontestable line of reasoning. In the absence of facts, skepticism is the position taken by the wise. Scholars' opinions on topics they have researched fully are justifiably believable because their knowledge about them is broader and better than that of common folk. However, when it comes to new principles and unknown matters, their way of looking at them is nothing more than hypothetical, and they always observe them in the light of their own prejudices. One could perhaps safely 16 Professor Hippolyte Leon Denizard Rival. Allan Kardec was his nom de plume for his Spiritist work, and author of several pedagogical books, fluent in many languages, was a member of several learned societies. Please refer to his bio in Anna Blackwell's preface to this book for more details. TR. State that scholars are possessed of even more prejudices than other persons due to their natural propensity for subjecting everything to the point of view of their own particular area of knowledge. Mathematicians accept no proof beyond algebraic formulas. Chemists relate everything to the interaction of the elements, and so on. Those who dedicate themselves to a particular specialty try to fit all their ideas into it. However, draw them away from their area of expertise, and they almost always talk nonsense because they submit everything to their own point of view, a very common human weakness. I will gladly and confidently consult a chemist concerning a question of elemental analysis, a physicist concerning the power of electricity, and an engineer concerning motive power. However, they must allow me, without affecting the esteem I owe them for their particular expertise, not to take their negative opinion about Spiritism into consideration any more than I would take an architect's judgment on a question about music. The physical sciences are based on the properties of matter, which can be subjected to experimentation and manipulated at will. Spirit phenomena, on the other hand, rest on the action of intelligences who have wills of their own, and who show us at every turn that they are not subject to our whims. Spirit manifestations consequently cannot be dealt with in the same way as physical matter. They require special conditions and a different approach, and trying to subject them to ordinary investigative procedures would be trying to establish analogies that do not exist. Science per se is incompetent to make any declaration of its own on the issue of Spiritism. It is not science's place to concern itself with the subject, and its favorable or unfavorable verdict regarding it carries no weight. Spiritism results from a personal conviction that scholars may hold as individuals regardless of their status as scholars. Submitting the issue to science would be like handing the solution of the problem of the existence of the soul to a group of physicists and astronomers. In fact, Spiritism rests entirely on the existence of the soul and its state after death. It would be highly illogical to think that a particular person must be a great psychologist simply because he or she is a great mathematician or anatomist. For example, an anatomist dissects a human body in search of the soul, but does not find it under his scalpel as he would find a nerve, nor does he see it rise like a mist. Based exclusively on the material examination of the issue, he thus concludes that the soul does not exist. Does it follow then that he is correct, although his view is contrary to universal opinion regarding the immortality of the soul? No. You can therefore see why Spiritism does not fall under the jurisdiction of science. When Spiritist beliefs become known and accepted by the masses, and judging by the speed at which they are spreading, that time is not far off. The same thing will happen regarding Spiritism as has happened regarding all other new ideas that have encountered opposition. Scholars will yield to the evidence. One by one, they will accept Spiritist beliefs by necessity, but until then it would be premature to distract them from their specialized endeavors in order to compel them to occupy themselves with a foreign matter that is neither within their prerogatives nor contained in their theories. Meanwhile, those who take a negative stance without a prior, in-depth study of the issue, and who ridicule those who do not agree with their opinion, forget that the same has happened regarding the majority of the great discoveries that have honored humankind. They risk seeing their names added to the list of illustrious deniers of new ideas and inscribed alongside the names of the erudite assembly, which in 1752 laughed uproariously at Franklin's paper on lightning rods, considering it unworthy of mention among the subjects to be discussed, or the names of that other group that caused France to lose its advantage in steam-powered navigation by declaring Fulton's theory an impracticable dream. Nevertheless, both issues were within the scope of science. If those assemblies, comprised of the greatest scholars in the world, had only contempt and sarcasm for ideas which they did not yet understand, but which would revolutionize science, customs, and industry a few years later, what hope is there that an issue completely foreign to their endeavors might be received any better? The regrettable errors of a few scholars regarding Spiritism should not lessen our respect for them regarding other subjects. But is an official diploma necessary for common sense? Are there only fools and simpletons outside academic halls? Let us take a survey of the followers of the Spiritist doctrine to determine if among them there are only uneducated persons, and if the huge number of individuals of merit who have embraced it would justify relegating it to the realm of simple superstition. The character and learning of such individuals authorizes us to state that if they affirm it, there must at least be something to it. We repeat once more that if the phenomena with which we are concerning ourselves had been restricted to the mechanical movement of objects, research into their physical cause would indeed be within the realm of science. However, since they involve manifestations outside the sphere of human laws and cannot be explained either by numbers or by mechanical forces, they are therefore outside the competence of physical science. When a new phenomenon arises that does not fit within the scope of any known science, then in order to study it, scholars must set their science aside and say to themselves that they are dealing with a new area of study that cannot be delved into according to preconceived ideas. Those who consider their reason to be infallible are very close to error. Even those whose ideas are highly erroneous are supported by their reasoning, and that is why they reject everything that appears impossible to them. Those who yesterday rejected the admirable discoveries that humanity is proud of today also followed their own judgment in doing so. What we call reason is almost always masked pride, and those who believe they are infallible place themselves on a par with God. Therefore, we will focus on those who are reasonable enough to suspend judgment regarding matters that they have not witnessed firsthand, and judging the future in the light of the past, do not believe that humankind has yet reached its apogee, or that nature has revealed the last page of her book to them. We would add that the study of a doctrine like Spiritism, which suddenly unveils such new and grand revelations, can only be profitably pursued by serious, persevering, and open-minded individuals animated by a firm and sincere desire to arrive at a result. This qualification does not include those who lightly make a priori judgments without having observed everything, and who neglect pursuing their examination of the doctrine with the necessary continuity, regularity, and concentration of thought, nor does it include those who, in order not to diminish their reputation as individuals of genius, endeavor to find something to ridicule in the most serious matters that are studied by individuals whose knowledge, character, and convictions deserve the respect of all who pride themselves on their social graces. Let those who do not deem the facts worthy of their attention abstain. No one intends to violate their beliefs. For their part, however, they should respect the beliefs of others. Continuity is what characterizes serious study. Thus, should we wonder at not receiving proper responses to questions that are serious in nature, but asked at random and abruptly in the midst of a bundle of other nonsensical ones? A complex question requires preliminary and supplementary ones in order to be answered clearly. Whoever wishes to acquire knowledge about a particular science must study it methodically, starting at the very beginning and following the chain and development of its ideas. Could someone who does not know the basics of a particular science pose questions at random to a scholar and profit from it? Could a well-intentioned scholar even give satisfactory responses to such a person? Such out-of-context responses would necessarily be incomplete and might therefore be nearly unintelligible, or they might even seem absurd and contradictory. The same applies regarding our relationships with spirits. If we desire to learn from them, we must take their course of study. However, just as we do in our own schools, we must choose our teachers and then work diligently. We have stated that high-order spirits only take part in serious meetings, especially those characterized by perfect communion of thought and moral sentiment. Frivolousness and idle curiosity repel them just as they would repel any reasonable individual. These two traits open the field to the mass of deceitful and frivolous spirits who are always eagerly watching for opportunities to mock us and amuse themselves at our expense. What would happen to any serious question? Posed in such a meeting? Who is it that is actually providing the response, if one is received at all? It would be like being in the company of boisterous revelers and throwing out questions such as, what is the soul? What is death? And others just as entertaining. If you want serious answers, you yourself must be serious in every sense of the word and place yourself within all the required conditions. Only then will you obtain worthwhile responses. Be most diligent and persevering in your studies. Otherwise, the high-order spirits will abandon you as a professor would abandon negligent students. 9. The movement of inert objects is a proven fact. However, it remains to be seen whether or not there are manifestations of intelligence in such movement, and if so, what their source is. We are not referring to manifestations involving the intelligent movement of certain objects, to manifestations involving verbal communications, or to communications written directly by the medium's hand. These kinds of manifestations are quite obvious to those who have deeply investigated the subject, but they may not at first glance be sufficiently independent of the medium's own will to be convincing to a new observer. Thus, we will focus only on the writings obtained with the help of a pencil attached to some object, such as a small basket, a planchette, etc. As we have stated, the way in which the medium's fingers are placed upon the object challenges the notion that any sort of skillful interference is at work in the way the words are formed. For the sake of discussion, however, let us suppose that by some extraordinary ability the medium might be able to deceive the most attentive observer. How could one explain the nature of the responses? Themselves when they are beyond the scope of the medium's own ideas and knowledge? We are not referring here to simple one-syllable replies, but to many pages written with astonishing speed on a subject that may either be spontaneous or specifically requested. From the hand of a medium completely unversed in literature stream forth poems of such sublimity and impeccable purity that they are worthy of the best human poets. In addition, what is even more remarkable is the fact that these pages are being produced everywhere and the number of mediums is rapidly increasing. Are these occurrences real or not? To this question, we can only reply, watch and observe. The opportunities will not be lacking. Above all, however, observe persistently over a long period of time and under the appropriate conditions. How have our antagonists responded to the evidence? They say you are victims of either charlatanism or illusion. First, we will reply that charlatanism is not likely where there is no profit to be made. Charlatans do not work for free. It would be a prank at the most. But by what strange coincidence could pranksters have an understanding? Amongst themselves from one end of the world to the other, leading them to act in the same way to produce the same effects, and to give identical answers on the same subjects in their various languages, if not in the exact same words, at least implying the same meaning? Why would serious, respectable, and educated persons cater to such maneuvers, and for what purpose? Why has the patience and skill required for producing these phenomena been found even among children? After all, unless mediums are mere passive instruments, it is obvious that we would have to confer on them capabilities and knowledge far beyond their age and social position. Next, our opponents state that if no fraud is involved, then both parties, mediums and observers, might be deceived by an illusion. There is no question that the quality of the witnesses does carry a certain weight. It is therefore reasonable to ask whether the Spiritist doctrine, which today has millions of followers, only recruits from among the uneducated. The phenomena on which Spiritism is based seem so extraordinary that we can understand such doubt, but we cannot accept the claim of certain skeptics that they hold a monopoly on common sense, those who, without respect for the conventions and moral values of their adversaries, label as incompetent all those who do not agree with their opinions. For judicious persons, the opinions of educated individuals who have observed, studied, and thought about a matter at length will always be, if not actual proof, then a likely hypothesis at the very least. After all, Spiritism has grabbed the attention of serious individuals who have neither an interest in propagating an error nor time to waste on futilities. As among our opponents' objections, there are some that are more plausible, at least in appearance, because they are based on observation and are raised by serious individuals. One such observation refers to the language of certain spirits, which does not seem worthy of the loftiness that might be attributed to supernatural beings. However, if we refer to the summary of the doctrine presented above, we will see that the spirits themselves teach us that they are not all equal to one another in knowledge or moral qualities, and that we must not take everything that spirits tell us at face value. It falls to sensible persons to separate the good from the bad. Obviously, those who conclude from this fact that we deal solely with evil beings whose sole intention is to deceive are unfamiliar with the communications given during meetings in which high-order spirits manifest. If they were, they would think otherwise. It is unfortunate that chance has served these persons so badly by showing them only the decadent side of the spirit world. On the other hand, we do not want to presume that an affinity of inclinations might have attracted evil, deceitful, and foul mouthed spirits to them rather than good ones. We could conclude, at most, that the strength of their principles is not solid enough to preserve them from evil, and since they find a certain pleasure in satisfying their own curiosity, evil spirits take advantage of this fact to mingle with them, whereas good spirits stay away. Judging the character of spirits by such facts would be as illogical as judging the character of an entire people by what is said and done in a group of a few wild or disreputable individuals who do not deserve the company of either learned or sensible persons. Those who judge in this way are like foreigners who enter a great capital by way of the worst outskirts, and then proceed to judge the entire population of the city according to the customs and speech of this one neighborhood. In the spirit world, there is also a good and an evil society. If such individuals would actually study what happens among high-ordered spirits, they would realize that the celestial city does. not contain only the dregs of society. Nonetheless, they might ask, do high-order spirits really come to us? And we would reply, do not remain on the outskirts. Watch, observe, and judge for yourselves. The facts are here for everybody to see, except those to whom the words of Jesus apply. They have eyes, but do not see. They have ears, but do not hear. A different variation on this opinion considers all spirit communications and all physical manifestations as being nothing more than the intervention of some diabolical power, a new produce, who can assume any form it wants in order to better deceive us. We do not consider such an idea to be worthy of serious examination, and thus will not dwell on here. It has already been refuted by what we stated earlier. We would only add that, if such were the case, we would have to concede that the devil is sometimes very wise, very reasonable, and especially very moral, or that there are good devils. In fact, how could we believe that God would allow only the spirit of evil to manifest himself in order to deceive us without providing us the counsels of good spirits as a counterweight? If God could not do so, it would imply powerlessness. If God could but did not, it would be incompatible with divine goodness. Either supposition would, of course, be blasphemous. However, we would like to emphasize that accepting the fact that evil spirits do really communicate means accepting the fact that spirit manifestations do really occur. And since they do occur, it is only with divine permission. Without being impious, how can we believe that God would permit only evil manifestations to the exclusion of good ones? Such a doctrine is contrary both to the simplest notions of common sense and religion. 11 other opponents add that it is strange that we seem to concern ourselves only with the spirits of well-known individuals. And they ask why these are the only ones who manifest. Like many other errors, this one comes from superficial observation. Among the spirits who manifest spontaneously, those who are unknown outnumber the illustrious ones. They often take names that are allegorical or in keeping with their character. As for those whom we evoke, except in the case of relatives or friends, it is quite natural that we would prefer those we know rather than those we do not know. As for illustrious personalities, they are the ones who are noticed more, and so they attract more attention. These opponents also consider it strange that the spirits of eminent individuals casually respond to our appeal, and that they sometimes concern themselves with matters that seem insignificant when compared to what they accomplished during their lives. However, this is not so surprising to those who know that the power and respect that such individuals enjoyed on earth do not necessarily entitle them to any supremacy in the spirit world. The spirits confirm the gospel words, the great shall be abased, and the small shall be exalted, which must be understood as relating to the position each of us will occupy among them. Thus, those who had been first on the earth may find themselves among the last in the spirit world. Those who make us bow to them in this life may return as the most humble laborers, for when they leave the earthly life behind, they leave all their grandeur behind as well. The most powerful monarchs might find themselves to be below their lowest ranking soldiers. 12, a fact borne out by observation and confirmed by the spirits themselves, is that low-order spirits often present themselves using well-known and respected names. Thus, how can we be sure that those who say that they had been, for example, Socrates, Julius, Caesar, Charlemagne, Fenelon, Napoleon, Washington, etc., had really animated those individuals? This question has been raised even among some earnest followers of the Spiritist doctrine. They accept the intervention and manifestation of spirits, but they ask what control we may have over their identity. Such control can indeed be very difficult to establish, but although identities cannot be verified in a way that is as authentic as the attestation of public records, they may nonetheless at least be verified by deduction according to certain indicators. When spirits of those personally known to us, relatives or friends, for example, especially if they have only recently died, manifest, their language usually corresponds perfectly to the characteristics that were familiar to us. This in itself is an indication of identity. Any remaining doubts, however, are settled when such spirits speak of private affairs or remember family matters known only to those involved. A son could hardly be mistaken about the language of his father or mother, nor parents about the language of their child. During these intimate evocations, the most extraordinary incidents sometimes occur, convincing even the most incredulous. Hardened skeptics are often startled by the unexpected revelations made to them. One other characteristic of such communications is often enough to verify a spirit's identity: handwriting. As we have stated, a medium's handwriting generally changes with the spirit who is evoked, reproducing it exactly the same each time the same spirit communicates. In cases involving persons recently deceased, it has been demonstrated innumerable times that the handwriting reveals striking similarities to that of the person during life. We have seen perfectly identical signatures. Nevertheless, we are far from citing this fact as a rule or as a frequent occurrence. We simply mention it as something worth noting. Spirits who have reached a certain degree of purity are the only ones who are free of all corporeal influences. As long as they are not yet completely dematerialized, this is the expression they use. They preserve most of the ideas, inclinations, and even idiosyncrasies they had on earth, and this is a further means of recognizing them. Above all, however, we arrive at such recognition through a multitude of details that only an attentive and continuous observation can reveal. We have observed spirits who had been authors discussing their own works or doctrines, approving or condemning certain parts of them, and others remembering unknown or little-known circumstances concerning their life or death. All these indications, which are at least typical evidence of identity, are the only ones that can be employed when dealing with abstract matters. Hence, if the identity of an evoked spirit may be established to a certain extent in certain cases, then there is no reason why it cannot be established in others. And although we do not have the same means of control involving persons who died at a more remote time, we always have the means of referring to their language and character. That is, the spirit of a morally upright person will never communicate like the spirit of a perverse or immoral one. As for spirits who assume respectable names, they soon betray themselves by their language and maxims. For instance, a spirit claiming to be Fenelon 17, but who unexpectedly offended common sense and good morals, would thereby expose its charade. But if the thoughts expressed were always pure, without contradiction and consistent with the elevated character of Fenelon, there would be no reason to doubt the spirit's identity. If such were not the case, one would have to believe that a spirit who is known to proclaim what is morally right could at the same time resort to useless falsities. Experience has taught us that spirits of the same degree and character, and who are animated by the same sentiments, are united into groups and families. Thus, the number of spirits is incalculable, and we are 17 French theologian and writer, 1651 to 1715 tr. Far from knowing them all, most remain nameless to us. A spirit of the same category as Fenelon may therefore come in his stead, and may even be sent by him, presenting itself under his name, because it is identical to him, and may act as his substitute, and because it provides us with a name so that we can focus our ideas. After all, what does it really matter if the spirit is or is not Fenelon himself? If it only talks about noble matters in a way in which Fenelon himself would have talked, it is a good spirit. The name it uses does not matter, and it is frequently no more than a means for us to fix our thought. However, in more intimate evocations, the same does not apply because, as we have already stated, an identity can be established by means of proofs that are in one way or another obvious. There is no doubt that spirit substitution may occasion a number of mistakes that result in errors and oftentimes deceit. Such is one of the difficulties faced by practical spiritism. However, we have never said that this science is easy or that it may be learned effortlessly, as is also the case with any other science. We cannot repeat too often that spiritism demands constant and prolonged study, and that since we cannot produce spirit phenomena at will, we must wait for them to occur on their own, frequently when we least expect it. For attentive and patient observers, the facts are abundant, for they can discover thousands of characteristic nuances that appear to them like rays of light. The same applies to every other branch of science. While the superficial observer sees in a flower only an elegant form, the botanist discovers in it treasures for thought. 13. These observations lead us to address another difficulty, the differences in spirits' language. Since spirits differ widely from each other in knowledge and morality, it is obvious that the same question may receive varied, sometimes contradictory answers from them according to their category. The same would happen if we were to question a scholar, an uneducated person, or a prankster. What is essential is to know to whom we are addressing our question. But one may ask, how are we to explain why even high-order spirits do not always agree with one another? First, we will state that besides the reason we have just pointed out, there are others that may influence the nature of the responses, regardless of the degree of the spirit's evolution. This is a very important point that will be explained by further study, lending credence to our advice for constant attention, in-depth observation, and above all, as with all human sciences, continuity and perseverance. Years are required to make even a mediocre physician, and 3/4 of a lifetime to make a true scholar. So how can one expect to obtain the wisdom of the infinite in only a few hours? Therefore, let no one be misled. The study of spiritism is infinitely immense and is connected to all the issues of metaphysics and the social order. There is an entire world opening before us, so why is it so? Surprising that understanding it will require a great deal of time? Furthermore, apparent. Contradictions are not always as real as they may appear to be at first. After all, do we not see scholars every day who profess the same science, but diverge in their definitions by employing different terminology or by viewing a matter from a different point of view, although the fundamental idea is still the same? Just try to count the number of definitions given to the word grammar. We must add that the form of an answer almost always depends on the form of the question. Thus, it would be immature to see a contradiction where there is generally no more than a difference of words. High-order spirits do not concern themselves with form at all. For them, the essence of the thought itself is everything. For example, let us return to the definition of soul. Since this word has no single definition, the spirits may differ as to its application just as we do. One will state that it is the principle of life. Another may call it the animic spark. A third may say that it is something internal, while a fourth may say that it is something external, etc., and all will be correct from their own point of view. We might even think that some among them profess materialistic theories, and yet such is not the case. The same applies with respect to the word God. According to some, God is the principle of all things. According to others, the creator of the universe, the supreme intelligence, the infinite, the great spirit, etc., but it is always God. We would cite the classification of spirits as another example. They form an uninterrupted series from the lowest to the highest degree, and classifying them is therefore arbitrary. One person might categorize them into 3 classes, others into 5, 10, or 20 is desired, without being incorrect. All human sciences offer the same example, with each scholar having his or her own system. The systems vary, but the science is always the same. Whether we learn botany according to the system of Linnaeus, Jussieu, or Tournefort, we are learning botany nonetheless. With this in mind, let us stop giving purely conventional matters more importance than they deserve. Let us devote ourselves only to what is truly important, and we will realize that in things that seem most contradictory, we will often, upon reflection, discover a similarity that escaped us in our first examination. 14, we would pass right over the objection of certain skeptics who point out the spelling errors of some spirits if it did not provide us with an essential observation. We must agree that their spelling is not always faultless, but only a lack of reasonable arguments could. Make such a fact the target of serious criticism by stating that if spirits know everything, they should know how to spell. We could point out numerous sins of this nature committed by earthly scholars, which in no way lessens their authority. However, the matter involves a more serious issue. For spirits, and especially for high-order ones, the idea is everything. The form is nothing. Freed from matter, their speech is as rapid as thought, and it is through thought itself that they communicate with one another without intermediary means. Thus, they must find it very inconvenient having to use the drawn-out and cumbersome forms of human language, especially its insufficiency and imperfections, in communicating with us to express all their ideas. They themselves have alluded to this fact, and it is interesting to observe the means they utilize to minimize the inconvenience. The Same would apply to us if we had to express ourselves in a language composed of longer words and sentences and containing fewer expressions than ours. It is the same type of difficulty that geniuses experience. They become impatient with the slowness of the pen as it always lags behind their thought. Thus, we can understand why the spirits attach little importance to orthographic trivialities, especially when dealing with a profound and serious teaching. On the other hand, is it not marvelous that they can express themselves equally well in all languages and that they understand them all? We must not conclude from this, however, that they do not understand the conventional correctness of language since they observe it when necessary. For example, the poetry they dictate almost always defies the criticism of the most demanding purist in spite of the ignorance of the medium. 15. There are still individuals who see peril everywhere, and in everything they are unfamiliar with, and there is no lack of those who have drawn unfavorable conclusions about Spiritism from the fact that some individuals have become so involved in studying it that they have lost their minds. But how could reasonable people accept this argument? Does the same not happen with all intellectual pursuits when the mind is weak? How many lunatics and maniacs have been produced by the study of mathematics, medicine, music, philosophy, etc.? Should we therefore ban studying them? What does that prove? Through physical labor, one can injure one's arms and legs, the instruments of physical action. Through mental labors, one can injure the brain, the instrument of thought. However, even if the instrument is broken, the spirit is not. It remains intact. Once freed from matter, it will again enjoy the fullness of its faculties. In its field and as an individual, it is simply a martyr to its work. All great intellectual pursuits may cause madness. The sciences, the arts, and even religion have all supplied their contingents. Insanity has an organic predisposition of the brain as its primary cause, making it more susceptible or less so to certain impressions. Whenever this predisposition exists, it shows up in a person's main preoccupation, turning it into a fixation. It may be about spirits for those who occupy themselves with that particular subject. It may involve God, angels, the devil, fortune, power, the arts, a science, motherhood, or a political or social theory. Victims of religious insanity would probably become insane spiritists if spiritism were their predominant preoccupation, just as insane spiritists would express their madness under other forms if the circumstances were different. I therefore state that Spiritism is not especially privileged in this respect. However, I will go even farther and state that Spiritism, rightly understood, is a safeguard against insanity. Among the most frequent causes of cerebral overexcitement, we should count disappointments, misfortunes, and broken hearts, which are all the most frequent causes of suicide. But true spiritists see the things of this world from a much higher point of view. They seem tiny and petty to them in light of the future awaiting them. Life is so short and fleeting that its troubles seem like nothing more than the unpleasant incidents of a journey. Things that in other individuals would produce violent emotions affect spiritists, but little, for they know that life's sorrows are trials that lead to advancement if they endure them without complaining, and that they will be rewarded according to the courage with which they have borne them. Their convictions give them a resignation that safeguards them against despair, a frequent cause of insanity and suicide. Furthermore, through spirit communication, spiritists know the fate of those who intentionally shorten their days, and that picture is sufficient to make them stop and think. Thus, the number of those who have been deterred at the brink of that deadly precipice is considerable. One of the results of Spiritism. The incredulous can laugh all they want. Nevertheless, I wish for them the same consolation Spiritism has provided to all those who have put forth the effort to probe its mysterious depths. Among the causes of insanity, we must also include fear. For instance, fear of the devil has deranged more than a few minds, and who knows the number of victims whose weak imaginations had been impressed with the threat of the devil, a threat which becomes even more terrifying through hideous details. Some say that the devil, as well as the bogeyman and the werewolf, is only used to frighten children in order to make them behave. However, when these children no longer fear the devil, they become naughtier than ever. In trying to control their behavior, those who use such stories do not take into account the mental health risks of scaring such delicate minds. Religion would be quite weak if a lack of fear were to compromise its power. Fortunately, this is not the case. Religion has other ways of acting on souls, and Spiritism could furnish it with highly effective and serious tools if religion knew how to utilize them. Spiritism shows the reality of things and thus neutralizes the dreadful effects of exaggerated fear. 16 objections still remain to be examined, the only ones that really deserve the label because they are supported by rational theories. Both accept the reality of all the material and mental phenomena, but they discount the intervention of spirits. According to the first of these theories, all the manifestations attributed to spirits are merely effects of magnetism, and mediums remain in a state known as waking somnambulism, a phenomenon witnessed by all who have studied magnetism. In this state, the mental faculties acquire an abnormal development, and the circles of intuitive perception are extended beyond the limits of ordinary perception. In this state, mediums draw from themselves and their own lucidity all they say and all the ideas they transmit, even regarding matters that are foreign to them in their normal state. We will not be the ones who contest the power of somnambulism, since we have witnessed its wonders by having studied all its facets for over 35 years. In fact, we agree that many spirit manifestations may be explained in this way. Nevertheless, extensive and conscientious observation has shown us a multitude of occurrences in which any participation by the medium, except as a passive instrument, is materially impossible. To those who share in this theory, we will therefore say, as we have already said to all others, watch and observe, for you have certainly not seen everything yet. Next, we will contrast two considerations taken from their own doctrine. Where did the Spiritist theory come from? Is it a theory dreamed up by a few individuals in order to explain the phenomena? Not at all. But then who did reveal it? The very mediums whose lucidity they extol. However, if this lucidity is as great as they presume, why would these mediums have attributed to spirits what they supposedly produced themselves? How could they have given such precise, logical and sublime information regarding the nature of superhuman intelligences. One of two things applies. Either they are lucid or they are not. If they are, and if we can rely on their truthfulness, then it would be contradictory to claim that they do not. Speak the truth. Second, if all the phenomena proceed from the mediums themselves, they should always be identical for the same individual, and we would not observe the same person communicating in different languages or alternately expressing matters that are completely contradictory. This lack of unity in the manifestations obtained by the same medium proves the diversity of their sources. And since we cannot find all these sources in the medium, we must look elsewhere. According to the second theory, mediums really are the source of the manifestations, but instead of producing them from within themselves, they draw them from their surroundings. The medium is a kind of mirror, reflecting all the thoughts, ideas, and knowledge of the other participants. Thus, the medium reveals nothing that is not known to at least some of the others. We cannot deny, and from this arises one of the fundamental principles of the doctrine, the participants' influence on the nature of the manifestations. But this influence is very different from what is assumed here, and there is a great distance between it and the medium being the mere echo of the thoughts of others, because thousands of occurrences have peremptorily shown just the opposite. Therefore, this theory contains a serious error, which once again proves the danger of premature conclusions. Since those who hold to this theory are unable to deny the existence of a phenomenon that ordinary science cannot explain, and since they cannot accept the intervention of spirits, they explain the matter in their own way. Their theory would be alluring if it could explain all the phenomena, but it cannot. And when the evidence obviously shows that some of the communications through the medium are entirely foreign to the thoughts, knowledge, and opinions of any of those who are present, and that they are often spontaneous and contradict all preconceived ideas, our opponents are not bothered in the least by this fact. They respond that thought waves go far beyond the immediate circle, and that mediums are a reflection of all humankind. Thus, if they cannot receive inspiration from their immediate surroundings, they go in search of it elsewhere in the city, the country, the entire world, and even on other spheres. We do not believe that this theory offers a simpler and more plausible explanation than that given by Spiritism, since it supposes a much more incredible cause. The notion that universal space is full of beings who are in continuous contact with us and who communicate their ideas to us is no more shocking to our reason than the supposition of universal. Thought waves coming from every point of the universe to converge on the mind of a single individual. We would repeat, and this is the crucial point that we must insist on, that the somnambulism theory and the one we may call the reflection theory were dreamed up by certain persons. They are individual opinions that were formulated to explain a phenomenon, while the doctrine of the spirits is not a human concept at all. It was revealed by the manifesting intelligences themselves when no one had even imagined it, and when general opinion was opposed to it. Therefore, we must ask, where did mediums come up with a doctrine that did not exist in the thought of anyone on earth? Furthermore, is it not a strange coincidence that thousands of mediums scattered all over the entire globe, and who had never met one another before, all agreed on stating the same thing? If the first medium who appeared in France was influenced by opinions that had already been accepted in America. By what strange impulse did he go in search of ideas 3,000 miles across the ocean and among people whose habits and language were foreign to him, instead of taking what was immediately around him? There is another circumstance that has not received enough thought, however. The earliest manifestations in both France and America did not take place either by writing or by speech, but by raps corresponding to the letters of the alphabet to form words and sentences. This was the way the manifesting intelligences originally declared themselves to be spirits. Therefore, even if we were to assume the intervention of the medium's own thought in the verbal or written communications, the same could not be said regarding them. Raps, their significance could not have been known beforehand. We could cite numerous facts that demonstrate the presence of an obvious individuality with a completely independent will on the part of the manifesting intelligence. We invite our opponents to make a more careful observation. If they were to study the matter more closely, without prejudice, and not draw any conclusions before having seen all that is necessary, they would recognize the true ineffectiveness of their theory to explain all the facts. We will limit ourselves to proposing the following questions. Why does the manifesting intelligence, whatever it may be, refuse to answer certain questions regarding subjects that are perfectly known about, such as the name and age of the questioners, what they have in their hands, what they did yesterday, what they intend to do tomorrow, etc.? If the medium is only a mirror reflecting the thoughts of the participants, nothing should be easier to answer. In response, our adversaries ask us why spirits, who must know everything, cannot answer such simple questions, according to the axiom, whoever can do the most can do the least. Based on this, they conclude that the entities are not spirits at all. We in turn will respond by asking what would happen if an uneducated individual or a prankster appeared before a group of learned scholars and asked, for example, what makes the day so light at noontime? Do you think they would respond seriously? And would it be logical to conclude from the silence or the scorn directed at the questioner that they were all fools? It is precisely because such spirits are of a high order that they do not respond to idle or silly questions. They do not like to be cross-examined. That is why they remain silent or advise us that they will only concern themselves with more serious matters. Finally, we would ask why spirits come and go, often in an instant, and why neither prayer nor begging can make them return after they have gone. If a medium only acts under the mental impulse of the other participants, it would seem obvious that in such a circumstance the agreement of all the joined wills should be able to stimulate the medium's clairvoyance. Therefore, if the medium cannot comply with the wishes of the other participants, even though concurring with his or her own will, it is because both the medium and the others are obeying an outside influence, and this influence is demonstrating its own independence and individuality. 17, when it is not the result of systematic opposition from selfish motives, skepticism with regard to the Spiritist doctrine almost always stems from an imperfect understanding of the facts. However, this does not seem to prevent certain persons from trying to settle the issue as though they understood it perfectly. It is possible to be highly imaginative and even highly educated, and yet lack common sense. And one of the first indications of a lack of common sense is belief in one's own infallibility. Lastly, many persons see in spirit manifestations nothing more than a matter of curiosity. We would hope that by reading this book, they will find in such remarkable phenomena something more than a simple pastime. Spiritist science consists of two aspects. The experimental deals with manifestations in general, whereas the philosophical deals with intelligent manifestations. Whoever has observed only the former is like someone who only knows about physics from recreational experiments without having delved into the science itself. The true Spiritist doctrine is found in the teachings imparted by the spirits, and the knowledge of this teaching is far too serious to be acquired in any other way than an in-depth and continuous study made in silence and reflection on the matter. Only under such conditions can one examine the infinite number of facts and nuances which have escaped many superficial observers and have consequently led them to form their own opinions. If this book had no other purpose than to show the serious aspect of the subject and to induce the study of it, that would be sufficient, and we would be happy to have been chosen to carry out a work for which we ourselves do not intend to gain any personal merit. Its principles are not of our own creation. The merit goes entirely to the spirits who have dictated them. We hope that it will produce a further result, i.e., that of guiding those who desire to learn, showing them in their studies the grand end, sublime objective of individual and social progress, and pointing out to them the road to follow for its accomplishment. We will conclude with a final consideration. In their probing of outer space, astronomers discovered among the scattered celestial bodies unexplainable vacant spots that did not seem to abide by the laws of the whole. They therefore speculated that such vacant spots were occupied by bodies that had escaped previous observation. In addition, they observed certain effects whose cause was unknown to them, and they said to themselves, there must be a world there because such a gap should not exist, and because such effects must have a cause. Then, by judging the cause by the effects, they were able to calculate the orbital elements, and later the facts appeared, proving their predictions. Let us apply this same reasoning to another order of ideas. If we were to observe the series of living beings in nature, we would realize that they form an unending chain of continuity from raw matter up to the most intelligent human being. But between human beings and God, the Alpha and Omega of all things, what a huge gap there appears to be. Would it be reasonable to suppose that humans are the final link in this chain? That they transcend without transition the distance that separates them from the infinite? Reason tells us that there must be other links between humans and God, just as reason told those astronomers that amongst the worlds they already knew about there had to be others. What other philosophy has filled that huge gap? Spiritism shows that it is filled with beings of all categories of the invisible world, and that these beings are none other than the spirits of humans in the different degrees leading to perfection. Thus, everything is linked together. Everything forms a chain from the Alpha to the Omega. You who deny the existence of spirits, go ahead and try to fill the gap they occupy. You who laugh at them, go ahead and dare to laugh at the works of God and the divine omnipotence. Allan Kardec. Prolegomena. Phenomena that escape the laws of ordinary science are manifesting everywhere, and are revealing the action of a free and intelligent will as their cause. Reason tells us that an intelligent effect must have an intelligent force as its cause, and the facts have shown that this force can communicate with human beings through physical means. When questioned about its nature, this force has declared itself to belong to the world of spirit beings who have divested themselves of the human corporeal envelope. In this way, the doctrine of the spirits has been revealed. Communications between the spirit world and the corporeal world belong to nature itself, and there is nothing supernatural about them. That is why we have found traces of such communications among all cultures and throughout history. Nowadays, they are commonplace and obvious to the whole world. The spirits have announced that the time appointed by Providence for a universal manifestation has now come in. That as ministers of God and agents of the divine will, their mission is to instruct and enlighten men and women, opening a new era for the regeneration of humankind. This book is a compilation of their teachings. It has been written at the order and under the dictation of high-order spirits. In order to establish the basis of a rational philosophy free from the prejudices of preconceived notions. It does not contain anything that is not the expression of their thought or that has not been submitted for their approval. The order and methodical arrangement of the contents, as well as the textual comments and the form of some parts of the redaction, are the only aspects contributed by the one who received the mission of publishing it. Among the number of the spirits who have taken part in accomplishing this task, there are many who have lived at one time or another upon the earth, where they proclaimed and practiced virtue and wisdom. Others do not bear the name of any personage whose memory history has kept alive, but their elevated status is attested to by them. Purity of their doctrine and their unity with those who bear venerated names. Following are the written terms received through several mediums, and in which the spirits have given us the mission of preparing this book. Be zealous and persevering in this work you have undertaken with our assistance, for this work is ours. In it we have laid the foundations of the new edifice destined to someday unite all humankind in one and the same sentiment of love and charity. However, before you publish it, we will review it together to make sure of all the details. We shall be with you whenever you ask for our presence in order to aid you in the rest of your labors, for this book is only one part of the mission which has been entrusted to you and which one of us has already revealed to you. Among the teachings that will be given to you, there are some that you must keep solely to yourself for the time being. We will advise you when the time has come to publish them. Meanwhile, meditate on them so that you will be ready when we tell you. At the beginning of the book, you are to put the vine branch that we design 18, because it is the emblem of the Creator's work. All the material elements that best represent the body and the spirit are united in it. The body is the stem, the spirit is the sap, the soul or spirit connected to the body is the cluster of grapes. Human beings elevate and purify their spirits through labor. And you know that it is only through hard work in the corporeal existence that the spirit acquires knowledge. Do not allow yourself to be discouraged by criticism. You will encounter bitter enemies, especially among those interested in deceit. You will even find enemies among spirits, for those who are not completely dematerialized often seek to sow the seeds of doubt through malice and ignorance. Carry on nonetheless, believe in God, and boldly move forward. We shall be with you to uphold you. The time is at hand when the truth will shine forth everywhere. The vanity of some individuals who think they know everything and want to explain everything in their own way will give rise to dissenting opinions. However, all who have the grand principle of Jesus in mind will be united in the same sentiment of love of the good and will be bound by a fraternal tie that will embrace the entire world. People will put aside all petty disputes about words in order to concern themselves solely with essential matters, and the doctrine will always be the same at the foundation for all who receive communications from high-order spirits. It is through your perseverance that you will harvest the fruit of your labors. The satisfaction you will feel in seeing the doctrine spread and correctly understood will be a reward for you, and you will perhaps realize its full value more in the future than in the present. Do not be troubled because of the thorns and stones that disbelievers and evil individuals will scatter along your 18C at the beginning of the prolegomena. Reproduction of the branch drawn by the spirits. Author. Path. Hold on to your confidence. Through it you will reach your goal, and you will always merit our help. Remember that good spirits only aid those who serve God with humility and a lack of self-interest. They repudiate anyone who uses the way of heaven as a stepping stone to earthly things, and they withdraw from the proud and ambitious. Pride and ambition will always be barriers between human beings and God. They are a veil thrown over the celestial splendors, and God cannot use the blind to explain the light. St. John the Evangelist, St. Augustine, St. Vincent de Paul, St. Louis, Spirit of Truth, Socrates, Plato, Fenelon, Franklin, Swedenborg, et.al. Author's note to the second edition. The principles contained in this book result either from the responses given by the spirits to questions directed to them at various times and through a great number of mediums, or from the spontaneous teachings given to us and to other persons concerning the matter at hand. The work has been coordinated so as to present a regular and methodical whole, and was submitted for publication only after it was carefully reviewed and corrected by the spirits themselves. This second edition has been the object of new and detailed scrutiny. The material placed between quotation marks following the questions represents them. Textual replies made by the spirits. The material set off in different type or designated in a special way comprises the comments or expositions added by the author and which were thoroughly supervised by the spirits.